Tremian Gasho, thank you for staying. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Okay, today I thought I'd share an essay from this book by Jeff Wilson. It's called Buddhism of the Heart. And Jeff Wilson is a professor of Buddhism in Canada at University of Waterloo. He'll be our speaker in November. So he'll be coming here in November to speak at our Eitaikyo service, and I think we're going to try to have a BEC class at that time. So he's written a book of really short essays, really wonderful essays on Buddhism and especially Jodo Shinshu. Jeff Wilson kind of encountered Shin Buddhism when he was studying at UCLA, working on a PhD, and he attended the West LA Buddhist Temple and got very close to the minister there, and then went to many different services at many Shin temples in Southern California area. So this is his essay, A Universe of White Ashes. There are many famous writings in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, but among them, there are a few that we return to time and again throughout our lives. One of these is Rennyo's Letter on White Ashes, in his collection Gobunsho. Rennyo was a descendant of Shinran and a great reformer of the Shin tradition. Many of the practices that we perform derive from Rennyo, such as chanting Shinnan's song of true and trusting the Sho Shinge. So Rennyo Shoni is the one that said, hey, we should all chant Sho Shinge. So it started with him. In the Letter on White Ashes, Rennyo tells his followers, when I deeply contemplate the transient nature of human existence, I realize that from beginning to end, life is impermanent, like an illusion. We have not heard of anyone who lived 10,000 years. How fleeting is a lifetime? Who in this world today can maintain a human form for even 100 years? There is no knowing whether I will die first or others, whether death will occur today or tomorrow. We depart one after another more quickly than the dewdrops on the roots of the tips of the blades of grasses. So that's from Rennyo Shonin's Letter on the White Ashes. I remember thinking this was rather depressing the first time I read it, but over the years it has slowly unfolded for me as it came to have ever more relevance and meaning in my life. One way that we can identify the enduring Shin classics is in how they continue to provide us with fresh insights, even when we were sure we had already thoroughly understood them. So it is with the chapter on White Ashes, which hides amazing depths in its short few sentences. Normally, White Ashes is read as a meditation on our own mortality and impermanence, as suggested by the use of the pronoun we when rendering it into English. In the morning, we may have rosy cheeks. In the evening, we may become white ashes. We is inclusive and suggests that the reader is to imagine him or herself becoming white ashes by the end of the day. Therefore, we conclude you should not take your life lightly, but live in gratitude and say the Nembutsu. This is how I always understood it, until recently. My son was born at the beginning of 2007, and as it turned out, the delivery was extremely difficult. My wife was severely injured and faced death, and though the baby seemed all right, it was impossible to tell if there might be something wrong with him resulting from the difficult labor. Things were about as dire as they could possibly be. I remember at one point in the middle of the night, my mother-in-law pleading with the doctors, please don't let her die. What was supposed to be the best day of our lives was turning into the very worst. On the second day, I was sick of the hospital food and felt that I wanted to get outside for a little while. So I walked down the street and ate in a Thai restaurant. After about 45 minutes, I started back to the hospital. As I walked, I thought about how I didn't know what was going on back in the intensive care unit. It was quite possible that while I was out, my wife or son, or both, had, in just these few minutes, passed away. Although I was in good health and had just had a tasty meal, circumstances might have already occurred that would ensure that in a few moments I would be miserable. The rosy cheeks of my wife or baby might already be white as ash. It was then that I realized that Rennyo's message has two sides. It isn't enough to realize our own mortality and try to live thankfully for the time we have. We also have to be aware of the brutally impermanent nature of everything we love and live in such a way that we never take them for granted. Truly, I think it would be easier for me to die in peace than it would be to go on living after the death of my loved ones. But regardless of my feelings, everyone I care for will disappear eventually. Now I wonder if this wasn't an even more important point for Rennyo, who lived a long life while watching wife after wife and child after child die. As a person of Shinjin, the trusting heart, Rennyo knew that if he was white ashes in the evening, it would merely mean he had returned to his natural home in the Pure Land. But as a survivor of so much loss, he was deeply aware that those left behind are the ones who bear the full burden of mortality. I did not quicken my pace as these thoughts came to me. If my wife and son had already passed, what could I do? Instead, I just chanted Nembutsu softly as I walked along Wilshire Boulevard back toward the hospital. For the years my wife had given me and the hours received from my son, I was grateful. Although, of course, I would be devastated to discover either of them no longer alive. In any case, I would strive to be grateful now and each day forward, or else lose the chance to show them how much they meant to me. Mother and baby are fine now, and we are all happy. But White Ashes has changed for me. Now when I read it, I'm reminded not only of my own mortality, but of that of others as well. And I realize that truly we live in a universe of white ashes, where everything is already on its way to destruction. I can do nothing to stop this, but today, right now, my wife, baby, and I have rosy cheeks, and I can say the Nembutsu in joy and gratitude, not only for the time I am allowed with them, but also the time they are allowed with me. A very beautiful essay, isn't it, by Jeff Wilson? And so it's very true. It's not talking about just our own impermanence, but it's talking about the impermanence of our loved ones and everything in this world around us. We put the letter on the white ashes in our service book. Maybe at the end of our discussion here, we'll read it together. It's on page 21. So we'll have a discussion about this. I just wanted to share, I've told this story before, but the professor I studied under, Professor Shigaragi, one of my classmates who, when he got married, Professor Shigaragi was invited to his wedding, and then my friend, video recorded their wedding reception, and he showed me Professor Shigaragi's speech that he gave at the wedding reception. Japan weddings, they're not as lively as over here. They don't have a dance or a DJ or anything like that, and it's more formal. And then usually there's speeches by an uncle or someone close to the bride or the groom, and so it's just mainly a lot of speeches. So my friend, of course, because this was his sensei, his teacher that he was studying under, asked Professor Shigaragi to say a few words of congratulations at his wedding reception. So Professor Shigaragi, he gets up and he says to everyone, and to the bride and groom, I know this is the happiest day of your life, but I don't want you to forget that in life we are born alone and we die alone. And he said that. And I watched this video, I was like, what? I could never say that at a wedding reception. Never invite Reverend Marv again to another wedding. But because Professor Shigaragi is such a man of the Dharma and the Nembutsu, nobody took it like, oh, he ruined the mood of the party or anything. It was a Dharma message at this wedding reception, powerful Dharma message. And even my classmate, he and his wife both really appreciated this short message by Shigaragi Sensei at their wedding reception. See, he's saying, don't don't think you're going to be here forever or your spouse is going to be here forever. You're born alone and you die alone, meaning, you have to appreciate each other while you have your life, And so he gave that message. I just wanted to share that with all of you. I know I've shared it before. So any thoughts on this essay by Jeff Wilson? Yeah, Nancy over here. Can you use that? Wait for the microphone. Yeah, thanks.
So I recently gave a talk at work on, my cancer journey.
Uh-huh.
And it surprised everyone because it was called My Cancer Journey, a little bit of gratitude with a little bit of attitude.
Oh.
And the whole point of it, which I think is the crux of what the author here is saying, is you need to find gratitude in everything. And the fact is you can find gratitude within your suffering as well.
Uh-huh.
You can find areas that, like for me, the people I've met along the journey, the opportunity to meet other people whose suffering was greater than mine made me feel more grateful for the fact that I wasn't nearly as sick as they were, or for those who had to travel 8 hours made me grateful that I lived so close, or that I had so many friends who could take me, whereas some of these other people had to pay people to bring them to the hospital and take care of them. Or that in your own suffering, you're grateful because it allows you to have a greater understanding in the depth of understanding of another person's suffering. And so I think this whole process of, life is impermanent, we need to accept it, but if we go down one of those paths that maybe were unexpected, be a part of the journey and welcome it into you and find the depths of your compassion and gratitude for yourself and others, because you will be surprised what uncovers.
Thank you for sharing that, Nancy. Thank you. Anyone else? Any thoughts on this essay or the letter on the white ashes or anything?
So
Matthew.
For white ashes, I had been coming here to OCBC for about 2 years at the most, well over 10 years ago, and my brother passed away. And the only time in my life I've ever seen my father cry was when we were going through this. And so for his memorial, I asked Reverend John if there was anything that we did traditionally at memorials, and he emailed me white ashes, and I read it at my brother's memorial, and it was so meaningful to my father. That was such a big thing. I remember my dad saying to me later on, he goes, that's it. That's exactly what life is about right there. So when my father passed away 3 years ago, it was really neat to read it at his. It was kind of meaningful. And what was cool too was there were some members of our Sangha here who were at my dad's memorial.
Oh.
So it was kind of like a thing for me, realizing that the Shin Buddhist path was the right path for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Matthew. And so we quite often read this letter on the white ashes at funeral services, and at funeral services there are many people here who aren't Buddhists, and they're attending a Buddhist service for the first time. And I've had many occasions where people have come up to me and, "Oh, Reverend, that letter, that thing that you read, can I have a copy of that? It was so wonderful." So they don't ask for a copy of my sermon, but they ask for a copy. But so the white ashes really hits people, even if they're hearing it for the very first time. Thanks, Matthew. Someone else had... Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Sensei, I've heard you say that although other religions use the term celebration of life, you don't recommend that for funerals. Could you comment on that?
Well, we've discussed it at ministers' meetings, and it is quite trendy, and people like to talk about having a celebration of life rather than a funeral service. But in our Buddhist tradition, I mean, it's hard to call it a celebration, isn't it? I mean, you just lost your mother or your father or your husband or your wife or your child, and we have to go through the grieving process, and so we try to help people go through the grieving process, and maybe in some senses, maybe it's okay have a little sense of celebration. I remember when my grandfather passed away, he loved sake, so all the relatives were around, and my uncle said, hey, we got to at least have a toast for, for Grandpa, and so they had a little toast for him. But we also had a funeral service too. So from a Buddhist perspective, I think we have the ritual of the funeral ritual, and then we go to the Chinese restaurant and we have the dinner and we laugh and talk and that's where we reconnect, and we wouldn't call it a celebration of life, but we are comforting each other by seeing each other, relatives and old friends. But I know it's a trendy thing to call it a celebration of life. Anyone else? Oh yeah, Janet? Janet, over here. Uh-huh.
Whenever I think about the story about it, can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah, okay, the mic's kind of going in and out, but go ahead.
It reminds me of when my husband passed away. He was having problems with low blood count, not red cells or white cells or anything like that. And he landed in the hospital on a Monday. And we go to visit him all the time, and he would joke and say, oh, the hospital food is not so bad. In fact, I like the hospital food. And the Friday, he went in on Monday, and that Friday, my mother was at a care home, and I had to go pay for her board that day, so I left him, and I said, I'll be back in a few minutes or a little while, because I have to go pay for Mom's rent. And while I was at my mother's place, I got a call from the hospital saying, your husband is coding, so come back right away. So I told my mom I have to leave, and I left right away, and by the time I got back to the hospital, Jim was already in a coma and not living or anything. So I called the kids, and the kids came right away, and we decided, that he wouldn't want to be on life support. So on Monday, he went in the hospital. During the visit, he was saying, hospital food is not bad, and we expected him to come home in a couple of days, and he didn't come home. So it always reminds me of the story about white ashes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Janet. And I think we've all had the experience of, you heard of someone passing away, a close friend or relative, and you think, gee, I just had dinner with that person last night or lunch or something, so it can be so quick. Eugene?
Yes, since I've recently joined, a lot of my old friends are curious as to what I'm gaining from attending. And I've come to realize that what I'm learning is helping me or gain an awareness of preparing for death. But when I say it to them, it sounds negative, but I mean it in a positive way, so I can appreciate my existence and not fear death.
Right.
But I realize they don't seem to grasp that as much. But this talk reinforces that.
Oh, thanks, Eugene. Yeah, Buddhists have this very matter-of-fact acceptance of our mortality, or by listening, we come to have that. And a couple weeks ago, many of you attended the Southern District Conference at Senshin Temple. We heard Reverend Kodani share some wonderful stories about how he encountered many very devout members who amazingly, almost matter-of-factly, he talked about one lady who said to him when he was a young minister, well, Sensei, it's probably going to happen Wednesday, so, onegaishimasu, please take care of me. And then so he didn't quite understand what she was saying, so he asked the head minister, what was that lady just asking about it? And the headmistress said, she's telling you she's probably going to die this Wednesday, and she wants you to take care of her funeral. I go, huh? You know? And amazingly, the lady passed away the following Wednesday, you know. But such a matter-of-fact way of talking about their own mortality. So he mentioned that, you know, he noticed that people who die well have also lived well. I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful thing that he shared. Yeah. But we may not all die that well. I mean, I might be kicking and screaming, no, I don't want to. But it is kind of a wonderful statement that people who have kind of died well have also lived well. Anyone else? Ellen?
Yeah, I wanted to make the comment that one of the things that I appreciate about the Buddhist path is that death, the fear of death seems to be mitigated. We don't have the same kind of dread that, you know, I can't, you know, I can't even think about or conceive of my own death. I think, like you said, there's more of this matter of fact. This is life as usual, and it's just part of our path, and that we come to an acceptance and appreciation, and like you just said, if you live well, you can die well, and I think that acceptance is a beautiful part of our tradition.
Thanks, Ellen. You know, my dad, he at my home temple in Oregon, they don't have a Japanese funeral home like Fukui Mortuary, so they have a funeral committee that really does the work of what the mortuaries do down here. And my dad served on that funeral committee for many years, so he had helped many families with the funeral arrangements. And so he saw how many families, they have a hard time if they don't have things prepared or their loved one never had anything written down. So my dad had his whole funeral program, everything written down years before. He had picked out who he wanted to be pallbearers, and he had his personal history written out, and he even asked his friends personally, hey, if I go first, will you be pallbearer at my... And then they go, oh yeah, I'd be very honored to, Hideo. And so, and then he outlived a lot of his friends. And so, gosh, I got to take that guy's name off the list. I outlived him. But that kind of a very accepting attitude. Sharon, you had something?
We just lost one.
Who did you lose?
We lost one of our uncles, just unexpectedly. And one of the things that I realized was there's a difference of accepting and trying to just push through it. And I think the way that I grew up gave me the opportunity to accept, but watching the family not have religion or have a direction, they didn't know how to accept, or they just wanted to get through it and not acknowledge it, which I thought was kind of interesting, a little sad, but it was, I'm grateful for the background that I have in the religion. Made a difference.
Thanks for sharing that, Sharon. Anyone else? Okay, then maybe we'll close with reading the White Ashes. Let me give you just a little bit of background. If you could turn to page 21. This letter, written by Rennyo Shonin, he originally composed it. He composed it to send as a letter of consolation to one of his followers who had tragically lost his 17-year-old daughter, who was engaged, about to be married, and she suddenly died. But before, his name was Mr. Aoki, but before Rennyo Shonin could mail this letter to Mr. Aoki died. And then another 2 weeks later, this Mr. Aoki's wife died. So within the span of less than a month, the daughter and then the father and the mother, all died. But Rennyo Shonin saved that letter, and then he sent it to another follower some time later who had also lost their daughter. So that's the context of this letter, okay? So let's read it together, the letter on the White Ashes, page 21. In silently contemplating the transient nature of human existence, nothing is more fragile and fleeting in this world than the life of man. Thus we have not heard of human life lasting for 10,000 years. Life swiftly passes, and who among men can maintain his form for even 100 years? whether I go before others or others go before me, whether it be today or whether it be tomorrow, who is to know? Those who leave before us are as countless and as fragile as the drops of dew. Though in the morning we may have radiant health, in the evening we may be white ashes. When the winds of impermanence blow, our eyes are closed forever, and when the last breath leaves us, our face loses its color. Though loved ones gather and lament, everything is of no avail. The body is then sent into an open field and vanishes from this world with the smoke of cremation, leaving only the white ashes. There is nothing more real than this truth of life. The fragile nature of human existence underlies both the young and the old, and therefore we must one and all turn to the teaching of the Buddha and awaken to the ultimate source of life. By so understanding the meaning of death, we shall come to fully appreciate the meaning of this life, which is unrepeatable and thus to be treasured above all else. By virtue of true compassion, let us realize the unexcelled value of our human existence, and let us live with the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, in our hearts. Thank you. I just want to mention that we used the late Reverend Taitetsu Unno's translation of the White Ashes. You'll see many different translations by many different individuals, but I think this is the most beautiful, most flowing English. And so we received permission from the Unno family to use his translation for our service book. Okay, thank you everyone for staying for the discussion, and we'll close with Gasho. Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu.